Okay. All right, welcome back, guys, to another episode of Tazz Knows. Today we have a very special guest. He's been a mentor of mine for a long time. His signatures are actually behind me right here. We got who tested me for my black belt, certified me in seminars and self-defense with Victory Martial Arts. He was the founder and owner of Victory Martial Arts. I'm honored to have him on the podcast, Mr. Dion Riccardo. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thanks, Sean. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you and to share some things with your audience. And, I just got to say off the bat, I'm just so excited about seeing where you've taken your martial arts as a martial artist and athlete, as well as a coach, a gym owner. It's really exciting to see that you've carried it on, and it's something that we saw in you way in the beginning. So I hope your students know that they're truly blessed to be taught by you.
Thank you, sir. They all know your name. I speak about you. I speak about victory and how those are the roots of warrior evolution. It's where everything that I teach comes from there. Things evolve over time, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too. But all my students know your name, so I'm happy that they get to hear your voice, a voice of guidance that guided me throughout my early years here, and get to see the face with it. So to start off, why don't you give a little bit of a background about yourself, how you got started with martial arts, and what it's done for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Berwyn Cicero area, and as a as a young dude, I started getting involved in the gangs and stuff. And I remember one day I was in the North Riverside Mall, and I came up on a security guard there, and he was also a Berwyn police officer. And we started a conversation, and he invited me to the martial arts school that he was teaching at. And, maybe after that, I saw him about three, four more times. And every time we talked about it, he kept on inviting me. And I asked my parents if I could go, if they could drive me over there so I could check it out. And they drove me over there. And that was the start of the martial arts for me. That was the start of the journey. When I walked into the martial arts school, I saw all these focused and disciplined people, doing these martial arts skills that looked, just so cool and awesome to me. And also I got the feeling that this was kind of a place where discipline is. I was kind of a wild street kid and stuff, so it was really foreign, that environment, but it was very uh tempting. It was like I wanted to be a part of that. It's like I needed to be a part of that. Um so that officer's name was Tony Pellegrino. We still talk to this day, 35 years later. And, I consider him one of my greatest mentors. And I'm truly thankful to him, because if it wasn't for him just talking to me about martial arts and what it could do for me and what kind of lifestyle it is, it gave me that alternative path so that, I didn't have to follow what the street was kind of telling me to do. I could follow something else. And thank God for that.
Absolutely. Um, what kind of martial arts was that you started with? What was like that first discipline that started it all for you?
Yeah, when I walked in, I didn't know what I was really getting into, but
Yeah.
it was so cool because it was a one of a kind gym at its time. There
Mhm.
was only one other school in the whole area, that's the Degerberg Academy, that had a similar format. And what they taught there was boxing, wrestling, some kung fu, a Filipino martial arts, like the stick fighting and the knife fighting, Kali, Arnis, Eskrima. And then he would also do, some level of judo and some jujitsu as well. And because they were police officers that ran this gym, they were kind of functional minded, meaning they didn't really practice like flowery type martial arts there. They only taught things that they thought were going to actually be practical for them on the job.
Okay.
And I was a benefactor of that.
It's crazy that you mentioned Daggerberg because, what I've noticed in the world of martial arts, it's a small world, and I think it builds bonds that are real strong. Because for me, all this started with wrestling in high school, and my freshman wrestling coach was Coach Kress, who was a student and an instructor at the Daggerberg Academy. And every practice, like he would always encourage, wrestling's great, but you need to go learn something else. You need to go learn more. Go learn submissions. Go learn striking. And before I got into Victory, I actually looked at Degerberg. But because I had never done any like martial arts in the past, I was unsure. They kind of wanted like a commitment. They said if you're not committed, we have the right to kick you out. And I was like, well, who do they think that they are? And I've actually, because Coach Crest still teaches out there, I've been to that facility a few times, still training with him, and it's just, I think when I looked at that and I saw the comparisons with Victory, because that's what I felt with Victory. As soon as I started training with Victory, I felt it wasn't something that was just for show. It's stuff that actually worked. Because
Hmm.
before I got to Victory, I did a little bit of training at the back of a fitness gym with a kickboxing coach. And just my first day at Victory, I felt there was so much more applicable skills and techniques than what I learned a year and a half with that guy. So it's cool to see how everything kind of circles in and everything circles back. Because when I started at Victory, I saw that you were a mutual friend with my wrestling coach. And I told him, hey, I'm starting here with Dion Riccardo. He's like, it's a good place to be.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, again, I feel very fortunate because that was the first kind of introduction. And another cool feature of that school is they had a lot of seminars, Sean.
Right.
So they were constantly bringing in other instructors. And at that time, there wasn't a whole lot of cross training between different disciplines and different gyms and different instructors. Again, so that was a really, really neat feature because at such a young age, I was exposed to guys like Dan Inosanto, Ron Balicki, just basically some of the giants in martial arts, I was exposed to really, really early on.
One of my favorite things about you, and I've noticed that with guys like Dan and Asanto, it's the concepts, and that's something that I really try to keep with my students now, because that's what I learned from you is like if you understand a concept of a certain technique or a certain discipline, you can apply that throughout many techniques. So it allows your body to be able to do more without having to like add more to your brain. You always told us mastery is daily subtraction, not daily addition. And we get that from Bruce Lee's philosophies. So all those
Yep.
things I kept into account. And for me, living the martial arts lifestyle is one of the most things that I'm grateful for getting out of Victory. Because applying those concepts that worked in the sport into your everyday life is where you start seeing the difference in just less stress, less anger, less everything. And you just start living a more peaceful life.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, and just kind of going into what we're kind of our topic of the day, optimization.
Yeah.
It's really important for new students and students that are maybe between 3 and 6 years of training and even in the 6 to 10 year to understand that there's optimal training, there's an optimal state, there's an
Mhm.
optimal mental positioning, and then there's suboptimal. The problem is, Sean, is that as a student you don't really know what optimal is.
Yeah.
So in other words, if you had to rate a class that you just took on a scale of 1 to 10, it would be very hard to rate because you don't have the criteria.
Yeah.
Meaning, like in other words, what was I turned on in my state in a learning state or not? What was my level of performance for that day? So
Yeah.
unless you have this kind of framework of, oh, when I go to class, this is what a perfect 10 looks like, then that means that there's two things that can happen. One is that you're going to increase the amount of time it is to gain that skill. Make no mistake, martial arts is a skill,
Mhm.
and learning a skill takes time, takes practice, but it also takes learning. And so if you're not learning at the optimal pace during these classes, let's say if you take let's say 100 classes a year, that's 2 classes per week for 50 weeks.
Mhm.
Well, if you only go to 50% of them optimally and 50% are suboptimal, you're basically extending the amount of time that it's going to take to gain that proficiency in that skill.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do is just kind of paint a picture of like what suboptimal looks like so everybody can relate and then kind of show them what optimal would be like. I got a couple examples. For example, if you've been training 1 to 3 years, you're basically just starting off to 3 years. Typically, if you're going to an evening class, you wake up whenever you wake up, you go through your day, you eat your meals, and whether those meals are highly nutritious or not is probably dependent on the person.
Yeah.
But you're basically going through the day, acquiring the stress of the day, dealing with people, with work, with school, this and that. Then most of the time you leave maybe 5, 6 o'clock to get to the school, maybe 6 o'clock or 7. And at that point, maybe you're 5 to 10 minutes before class. You walk in, you have a conversation with maybe somebody you see at the gym. The instructor starts the class, and then boom, you're trying to shift and make this transition from Sean being this person that went through this whole day, and whether the nutrition was right or not is debatable.
Yeah.
And then getting the class and having to shift into an optimal learning state so that you get the most out of every class.
Yeah.
Now, to make things worse sometimes, Sean, and here you can hear some of the things that you can look out for to see if you're optimal. So if you're in class and you're watching the instructor and maybe you're 20, 30 minutes in, and all of a sudden, after he gets done showing you what he's going to show you and wants you to perform, you start walking back after he says break and you don't remember what he just showed you,
Yep.
you're not in an optimal state. In fact, that workout is probably it's only going to get 30% of its potential in you actually learning something that day.
Mhm.
Now, can you optimize so that when you go to class that you get the absolute most out of it? You absolutely can optimize. And not only that, it'll stop you from getting those plateaus of learning, but it'll also prevent injury as well. Because most of the time, when people get injured in the martial arts dojo or in the gym, it's because either A, they're not nutritionally meeting their needs, so their nutrition needs were not met that day, or their 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 cognition, they get to a place where they're not conscious during class anymore. They're just kind of operating at this like subconscious level. And then all of a sudden a weird injury comes up. They step on the mat kind of funny and their toe rolls or just the craziest stuff because they're not conscious at that point, meaning the brain and the muscle body connection is not firing properly. So you can see what a suboptimal going into class day would look like. Now, what would be optimal? So the optimal would be is you can't avoid the stress of the day, but you can control the nutrition of the day. So the nutrition for the 3 meals leading up to and throughout the day is very important. But the most important nutrients of the day when you're training comes right before the workout, an hour to maybe an hour and a half before the workout, during the workout, and after the workout. And so you will get probably 20 to 50% more out of every class if you just paid attention to those 3 meals or 2 meals leading up to the workout, and then especially focusing on what am I taking in nutritionally right before I work out, during the workout, which is a very key component, and then right after the workout to fuel recovery. Now, after you've gotten to the gym, okay, let's start with the ritual there. So if you're going to try to transition from being busy all day to all of a sudden going in and trying to pick up a new skill and learn things that a coach or a teacher is showing you, then that means that basically your body and your mind have to be at optimal states. Now, how do you make that transition? Well, instead of coming into the class 5 minutes beforehand, it would be optimal if you came to class 15 to 20 minutes beforehand. It would be it would be extra optimal if you came in 30 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
Now, what do you do when you get there? Well, part of that transition is to go from a stressed and kind of a excited state to a relaxed state. So instead of talking and communicating with everybody, maybe you just say hi to everybody and then you sit down and you start with some breath work, getting your breathing under control so that now all the cortisol that you've built up during the day from all the stresses of the day are starting to come down. What you'll notice is at that point is that your mind will start to become clearer. Then maybe keeping that breath work working, maybe you start going into some stretches, and then finally, maybe you go into some of the techniques that you've learned in the previous week. So now you're shadow boxing or doing with a partner some of the techniques that you've been working on in the previous week. So you're priming yourself to get the most out of this class. Mentally, you're more prepared, and physically, you've prepared your body. So, in other words, most students should not just use the warm up in the class. They should actually, again, breath work, get yourself calmed down from being in the car, fighting traffic, all that stuff. Calm it down, bring yourself down, mentally get clear. Then, once you're mentally clear, now start to stretch out, see where you're tight, work on those areas a little bit more, loosen up. So now you're physically priming your body. And then finally, the last phase of that ritual would be to actually shadow box or get a partner and work on some of the techniques that you're working on in the previous week or the previous weeks. That'll help keep things fresh. And also, it turns on the mind body connection. So now my mind is alert and ready to learn, ready to focus on what the coach is trying to teach me. And then my body's ready to perform because I've linked my mind and my body. I'm at 100%.
Mm.
Now, that ritual should be done every single class. Now, if you combine that ritual with the proper nutrition in the day, and again, the most important nutrition is before, during, and after your workout, you're increasing your chances of having an optimal class by 50% or more right off the bat. Does that make sense, Sean?
Yeah, yeah. It's all stuff that I see in my students. You know, you run through a technique and then all right, 1, 2, you guys go try it. And then right away I can tell the people they're looking around and then they're saying, well, what are we doing? So it's like I see that. And I see that from most of the people that come in right when we're starting the warm-ups. Right. And for me, and I've gone through that because for me, when I was training full time and not teaching, I would try 15 minutes before class that was optimal for me. It gave me time. For me, it was wrapping my hands. I had my rituals every day. I'd say hi to everybody, fist bumps here. But as soon as I started wrapping my hands, that's when everything from the day faded away. Everything from school, work, traffic, it all faded away. And as soon as I wrap my hands, that's telling me it's time to learn. So all of that makes sense. And it was like, how would you handle like because for me, if one thing went out of whack and I couldn't hit one part of that routine. So now in my mind, I feel like, okay, now it's not going to be optimal. How do you get yourself out of that? So that maybe you missed a routine, maybe you missed a warm up, maybe you had an extra stressful day at work. How do you optimize your brain or tell your brain to calm down?
So here's the thing, if you know that you're having a day like that, I
Yeah.
would start that ritual on the car ride to the gym.
Yeah.
So instead of listening to music or, catching up or whatever, you do in the car, shut all that down and start your breath work in the car so that you're transitioning not once you get to the gym, but you're transitioning before you're actually getting to the gym.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's always a way. And here's the other thing, and it goes into optimal, right?
Yeah.
So, there are ways, there are things, there are techniques, Sean, that you can do during the day to bring down stress, cortisol, And why is that important? Is because it's fight or flight. When
Mhm.
you're not in a good learning state, when you're in a fight state. And when you're stressed, you're in that fight state most of the time. If you're in that, if you have an incident where you feel stress and anxiety go up, most you don't want to wait until the evening class to try to do your breath work. That's when you want to step in optimally, do a little breath work, gain some clarity of mind, and then approach forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hmm. That's I think for a lot of people, and I'm guilty of it too. When we're running late, we focus on we're gonna be late, and that's all we think about. We're gonna be late, we're gonna be late. But instead of occupying that mental space with that negativity to now just start whatever you were supposed to be doing at that time, start that process there, is what you're saying, right? Start the breathing, start the
Yes.
simply, yeah. So that
And
you're
let me just add this too, Sean. On there are times where, let's say it's been a particularly stressful day. You get to class 5 minutes early, right?
Mhm.
And you just know that the transition is not going to happen or it's going to be very difficult. Go home.
Mm,
Go home. It's better if you go home and de-stress and come back to the next class optimal
okay.
than to go in that class suboptimal in mind and body and risk an injury.
Yeah. That was something I almost felt guilty about doing when I was training. I don't remember any day that I just straight up went home, but I would sit out. Like I would, if Anthony needed help with the class, or I would just be, the demonstration dummy, whatever. But I would stay away from training because for me it was injury. Like I was always very mindful of not wanting to be hurt because this is something that I want to do every day. Even before I started teaching, it was like I want to do this. This is my life. This is part of who I am. Like I don't want to take time off from injury. So anytime I felt like something might have been off and I wasn't going to be able to that mind body connection, because even now, if I jump in with my students, I don't get the best warm up and I'm trying to transition from teacher to now athlete again. I spend a big chunk of my time like doing from head to toe. Does what feels tight, what doesn't feel strong, and I'm going to work around those things because especially now that I'm running the gym and injuries, I don't have time for that right now. So how, I I guess what I'm saying, is there a way for a student to get past feeling guilty of not being in training if they feel like they're not optimal? Because sometimes I have students that want to push themselves because they think that that's what's going to make them better. They need to be able to break through what they're feeling at that moment of feeling like they can't train. So they're going to force themselves to do it. And that is where I typically see people, they have a rough day of sparring, they get frustrated with a new technique, or they do get injured. So how would you recommend them to get past that guilt?
Yeah, it's the difference between being emotional about the decision and
Okay.
strategic,
Okay.
okay? So, and those are always in opposition to others.
Yeah.
So, the first thing that you have to do is you have to detach from that situation. Like, okay, so looking at myself, I didn't get good sleep last night. My nutrition was way off today. I had a fight with my boss. My girlfriend's mad at me. My mom and dad they're wanting me to cut the grass, and I haven't done that yet. And
Mhm.
I'm only going to get to class right on time. I might not even be there right on time. I'm walking in late.
Yeah.
So separating the emotion from that is am I going to be optimal? Can I put myself in an optimal state going into this class? If the answer is no, then you're better off going home and getting optimal as soon as you can. Like, breathe, get
Mhm.
some good food in you, go to sleep early so that the next day you're starting off better. And if you really think about that's the difference sometimes in pro athletes, Sean, is that they know when to step away or their coaches recommend to them when they need to step away from training where it's just not going to be the best today and we're just risking too much injury.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing. Students, when you say that if you're optimal when you go into class, that you're cutting down the amount of time that it takes to learn and develop that skill, but
Mhm.
you're also preventing injury. A lot of times they can understand, okay, well, if I only go to 50%, if I only go to 50% of my classes optimal and the other 50% are suboptimal, I went to 100 classes. That means only 50 classes did I get the most out of those
Yeah.
classes. They can understand that, but they can't understand what injury is until they have one. So let me explain injury, guys. So the reason why injuries are so insidious, especially when you're trying to learn a skill like martial arts, is that if you get one injury, you're talking about probably 1 to 4 weeks in most injuries where you're not going to be able to train. And if you tough it out and you do train, you're going to make the injury worse.
Yeah.
So 1 to 4 weeks, pretty much giving it rest. Okay. Then after that, you're talking about another 1 to 4 weeks, could be longer, 6 to 8 weeks of rehabilitation so that injury actually area gets stronger. So it's one thing for an injury to return back to its normal state. It's another thing to have that injury go from the normal state to actually being a little bit stronger than it was before you injured it.
Yeah.
So really, every time that you get injured, you're talking about a minimal 8 to 14 week break.
Mm.
So if you have one injury a year, think about having to take 14 or 12 to 18 weeks off during a 1 year of training. You only have 52 weeks of
Yeah.
in a year of training. You're going to take 12 to 18 of them off. So that's why injury is so insidious. And it could be one of the factors that prevents somebody from actually reaching their potential in martial arts.
Yeah. Because there's one student that I have in mind that we had to convince him to go get his knee checked out because his knee has been bothering him for a long time, and his big thing is he didn't want to take time off because he had already missed 6 months last year because of an injury. He didn't want to take more time off. And I told him exactly what you said. It was like, if you keep training with that knee, you're not getting your fullest potential of your training. You're just getting frustrated with the training. So there's better chances of you quitting because you're so frustrated. And think about your life after training. Like, how's your knee going to be if you're wearing it down to the bare minimum of what's left of it without getting checked out? And he went to go get it checked out. So, it,
Yeah, good for him. Yeah, there's no progress. That's
yeah,
the problem. When you get injured, even if you continue to train, I mean, you're injured, so you're training suboptimally. You can't get better
yeah,
training injured. You're
yeah,
just maintaining at the best case scenario. And it kind of leads to, like, for the student that, hopefully that the people that are starting their training up to 3 years can take away some of that,
yeah,
the nutrition, portion to get themselves in the right state to perform and to learn in the evening classes, but as well to go in and do that ritual. Start with breath work, go into stretching, find what's tight, and then review and practice what you've done in the previous weeks of practice.
yeah,
Going into the person that's been training 3 to 6 years, the number one issues that they're dealing with, that there are opportunities for optimization, is they hit plateaus and stalls, Sean. So, in other words, the students, because you've been teaching for a long time, that when a student has reached a certain level of skill and proficiency, like, let's say when the first class to the 3 year mark, your learning of skills is going like this.
yeah,
But the proficiency in those skills don't really take off until you're in 3 years to the 6 year mark.
mhm,
So your skills at that time, you're not going to be learning as much between 3 and 6 years, but you're trying to hone the proficiency of the things that you already know. And that's where most people, and you can confirm this, Sean, that's where a lot of people plateau out. That's
yeah,
why you see them not getting their black belt or pursuing beyond that. That's why you see drop-offs,
yep,
in that 3 to 6 year mark. It's because they're reaching plateaus, and you constantly will hear from students in that phase that say, I just don't feel like I've been getting better
yeah,
over this time period.
yep,
Now, how do you optimize? Well, let's just talk about training in itself. If you've been training between 3 and 6 years, that means that you're probably getting between 4 and 8 skill training sessions a week and probably some sparring in there.
Mhm.
Okay. So the way to optimize for between the 3 and 6 year student mark is to turn down the skill training a little bit, meaning if you were going to 4 skill training sessions, maybe bring it down to 2, bump up the sparring sessions just a little bit, and have planned deloads every 2 months. So meaning you do two, so you're, let's say you're sparring 4 times a week, right?
Mhm.
If you really think about how much stress that is, like everybody's got a certain level of stress from just their life. Let's say it's this high.
Yeah.
But now when you go in and train and you're doing a lot of sparring, now you're bringing your overall stress level up to here.
Mhm.
So that means that if you don't deload every, let's say, 8 weeks or so, that you're going to plateau in your proficiency of those skills that you're trying to apply. And you're also going to start to plateau in your love for training.
Yeah.
So my suggestion, just one, and there's probably 10 or 15 things we could do to specifically optimize the 3 to 6 year student. But
Mhm.
one thing that they can apply right now is start scheduling it out. Every 8 weeks or every 2 months, take 1 week where you go to the gym. You'll get a lot out of this. You go to the gym in your street clothes and just watch class, watch sparring. You will gain so much intelligence because while you're resting your body physically, while you're recovering from that big stress load that you've had, remember, you brought the stress load up to here and you carried it for 8 weeks, Sean. 8 weeks, right?
Mhm.
So when you take that 1 week where you say, okay, I'm not going to be physical, I'm just going to let myself be mental, and you go to the sparring sessions and you watch what's going on, it's going to give you all the downloads so that and the motivation to go back into the gym the following week, do another 8, and then take that 1 week break. Now, I would also say there's some things that you could do specifically to optimize your nutrition during those breaks. Meaning, if you're taking a break to gain recovery over your body and bring your stress levels down, then there's multiple things we can do nutritionally, supplementally, and also in strategic physical actions like saunas, different things that you can do in order to bring the stress level down and bring your recovery of your physical body to its maximum potential. So that when you start the next 8 week block of training, you're not starting at your weakest point. You're starting at a very strong point and entering in it with low levels of stress. Does
Yeah.
that make sense, Sean?
That's so much sense. And I can confirm it from both sides of the mats because there were days where I felt like that I would just come in and watch the class. And I had my training schedule, because when I first started training, I had school. I was going to school full time. I was working part time. If I had a day off, I went to the gym to a class that maybe I never really attended, especially in the mornings. If I had a day off completely and I never went to the morning classes, I would go to the morning classes just to watch, just to see everything. And you see things differently. You see the way that your teammates train, and you start seeing, oh, they drop their hands when they do this, and it makes you think, do I do that? And then it starts building that, like you said, that excitement to go back and like, okay, now I know what I need to work on because now I can see it. I think so many people are so close to what they're doing, especially when they get caught up in their own training and they don't take that time to rest or I encourage them to record themselves and watch that back. You really get to start seeing when you take that step back, you can see what you need because you can have coaches tell you, hey, you're dropping your hand here, you're dropping your hand here. You can have the people that you're sparring hitting you in the same spot. But until you see it, until you see what it looks like, that's when it clicks for a lot of people like, oh, something's missing here.
100%. And you're not going to see that during class.
Yeah.
Like you're not like when you're in your sparring sessions, you're not going to see that. It's only when you do step back and kind of watch it from an outside perspective that that really becomes real. So you're 100% spot on, Sean. Mentally, you need the break.
Mm,
It brings the stress level down. and then you physically recover your body to the point where you feel fresh.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when your body's fresh and your mind is fresh, now you don't need like a motivational speech before you go train. You're going to want to be in there because you're like, my body's ready to perform and I'm mentally ready to apply what I saw when I
Mhm.
went in there and just kind of watched things going on. Let me give those guys for the 3 to 6 year old one more practical
Sure.
thing.
Yeah.
So between 3 and 6 years, you've gained a certain like toolbox of skills,
Yeah.
okay? But the potential lies the most for those people, Sean, is bringing in cross training specifically for athletic attributes that they don't currently possess. Okay. So, in other words, I've been training, let's say, 4 years. My skills are at a certain level and they're proficient at a certain level. But now I have to have a coach look at me and say, I noticed that you're kind of weak in the pulling department. Like,
Mhm.
you're not explosive when you really got to suck somebody in, or even when you're playing around in the guard. Sometimes you're in the clinch position, you just don't look like you're very strong, like you could fire your muscles. Well,
Yeah.
at that point, now you have to construct a whole training program around developing these athletic attributes that support the skills you're trying to do in your sparring. So, the practical advice is when you're in that 3 to 6 year development stage of your martial arts, focus a little less on, again, maybe 2 skill sessions a week, maybe 4 sparring sessions per week. So that's a total of 6 kind of sessions that you're working per week, but then dedicate a little bit of time, maybe 2 sessions per week toward the athletic attributes. And we could talk for a whole podcast just on athletic attributes, but it's super important when you're in that 3 to 6 year mark to work on those things because you've already got a certain level of skill, but you got to turbocharge those skills with these athletic attributes like explosiveness and speed, and there's others. Strength is another one.
Mhm.
Um, so don't just randomly go into the gym. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about looking at your martial arts and looking at when you're sparring and have a coach dissect for you. You don't see when you throw your jab, it's like your legs aren't they're not propelling you forward in an explosive manner. You're very smooth in your jab. Your form looks very sharp, but it's like your body isn't propelling your technique. It's not fueling that technique. And so you would build a training program based on what is going to give me the best explosiveness when I'm in, a stand-up fighting stance. Does that you get what I'm
Yeah.
saying, Sean?
Yeah. And that's something that I've believed from the beginning. Like I've always been, and I haven't been one to do it the proper way, but I always said that your physical abilities, like your strength, your speed, your durability, all those things are just as important as your technique. Because if you don't have the strength and the speed and the timing to execute these techniques the way that they're supposed to, you can know everything that there is to know about a sport. But if you can't perform it the right way, then what's the point of having all that knowledge?
Yes, and like we said before we got on, we started recording, is that if you have two people an equal level of skill,
Hmm.
the force multiplier, the thing that breaks that tie is athletic attributes. If this guy is slightly more explosive, slightly stronger, slightly more, faster, then this guy is going to have the advantage, even though both of them have the same exact skill level. It is the difference maker for the people that are between 3 and 6 year training. They got to get serious about that. And if they adjust their training regimen, little less skill, keep sparring consistent, add in a couple days a week of focused athletic attribute training, it'll make a huge difference. And those plateaus, remember we talked about those guys?
Yeah.
Their biggest enemy is plateau and stalls. If they implement that training, that athletic attribute training, they're going to see that their stalls are no longer there. The reason why they stall is because me and you are same level skill, let's say, Sean, and
Mhm.
we go in there spar, we negate each other.
Yeah.
It's not until I elevate my athletic attribute that I actually start to see my breakthroughs. So the reason why guys are stalling and plateauing is because their skills are the same and their skills are growing at the same level, but their athletic attributes are staying stagnant.
And I've seen that. The people that tell me that they feel that they hit those plateaus, they feel like they need to go learn something new. They don't feel like they need to actually learn how to perform these things better or get stronger or get faster. They need to go learn something new, And I never had the words until right now of how to, because I've always, for me, it was like that athletic journey. Like I fought at 125 pounds. I wrestled in high school at 105 pounds. I was always the small guy in the room, So I always felt like I need to make my technique as crisp as possible. I needed to get stronger. I needed to get more explosive to be able to keep up with the bigger guys. So when it came to plateaus, I never really felt like I had that because I always felt like I had something to work on. So when people would come to me as like, I feel like I plateaued, I was like, I don't know. I don't know what you're saying, because and I never it always irked me when people said that they felt like they had to feel something or to learn something new. When I first started teaching, I took it personal, like, am I not teaching you good enough? But then I got past that. But I still felt like I didn't have a way to help the people that were hitting those plateaus. So thank you for explaining that. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to a student that I just talked to today, and I'll name him because he deserves the praise. His name is Jeremiah. Jeremiah had his first grappling competition 5 months after training. He took second place in that grappling tournament. He's competed
Go
regularly.
Jeremiah.
Yep. He made his MMA debut in February and he won. And today we were just having the conversation. He's like, I noticed that the highest level guys in the UFC, they don't do anything fancy. They don't do anything flashy. But what they have is great timing and they're fast and they're explosive. He's like, that's what I need to get myself to. It's I have a certain level of skills already. And Jeremiah's at that 3 year mark. I think he just hit 3 years with us. So he's right at that point where he's starting him by himself is seeing that he has to work on the attributes in order to get the techniques that he knows to work better.
Yeah, that's great. Go Jeremiah. So it's funny because it's like when again, between, when you first start martial arts in 3 years, it's like learning, you're picking up the big rocks of learning.
Yeah,
Because that's when you're really starting to learn about all these different skills and tools in martial arts. But then when you're in the 3 to 6 year old time frame, it's like you're collecting just small rocks and every once in a while. So you're going to learn something new every once in a while, and they're probably little things, not
yeah,
the big chunks of this is what a jab is, this is what a cross is, this is what a combination is, this is how you do an arm bar. You're going to be learning little things, little tweaks, little intricacies that make the difference. But also the amount that you're learning in that 3 to 6 year phase is a lot smaller
yeah,
because it's not really the learning phase. It's more of the application phase. And you're trying to apply what you've learned in these first 3 years that you've built this foundation. And then again, with that being said, if you're trying to apply these skills, you have to gain a certain amount of athleticism to support those techniques and skills.
yeah,
So going back to the deload weeks too, what's interesting, Sean, is that there's so many benefits of taking 1 week off of training and just going to observe and then you know, this list of things to do to help yourself recover so that every 8 week block that you're training, you're just getting better. You're just getting better. You're getting stronger. You're getting faster. You're getting more explosive. If you do it in an ad hoc way, kind of at random, you're not going to get that benefit. You're not going to. Athletic attributes is like stairs. Okay, it progressively has to go hard. It's more stressful. It has to be progressively more difficult. But if you're kind of doing it random, then you're never stair stepping your athletic attributes up the ladder.
So when you're talking that deload, are you also deloading from the athletic attribute training too?
Yes, because again, you want it's kind of like in that week of deload, you're trying to think getting my health back.
Okay.
I want to try to get my health back as best as possible. If I got a little nagging injury, I'm taking care of that. That's my week to get that thing under control, right?
Yeah.
I'm also during that time, the way that you do your nutrition is super important. So in other words, typically that's the time to feed up. Now,
Okay.
let me just explain this, Sean. There's two metabolic systems in your body, the AMPK pathway and the mTOR pathway. And in an ultimate athlete that's optimal, they're balancing the AMPK and the mTOR pathway. They're balancing those two. Now, what is AMPK? AMPK is the stress, is the training. Okay. So when you go to a training session or a sparring session, what you're activating is your AMPK energy system. Now, when you're recovering, like when you're sleeping, you're activating your mTOR pathway. So now think about this. For 8 weeks, you're hammering the AMPK pathway, right? So you're definitely not in balance. You're trying to keep that daily balance,
Mhm.
but it starts to spill over. Now, what are the common things that you see? Athletes feel overtrained. They
Yeah.
start having problems sleeping. They're losing weight and they don't know why, or they're gaining weight and they don't know why. They're feeling dismotivated from the gym. These are all signs that the AMPK pathway is now spilling over. Whatever balance you were trying to do, AMPK is now starting to win over.
Mhm.
Now, when you deload after 8 weeks of pressing on that AMPK pathway and you just give that a break, you're allowing that stress and that training to come down and you feed up, meaning you bring your calories up 2 to 500 calories per day. So what you're doing is you're activating every time you eat, you're activating mTOR, recovery. Okay. So you're telling your body several times a day, I'm eating more because I want you to relax and recover. And you're going to notice sleep improves. You're going to notice that libido comes back. You're going to notice that motivation is stronger, that your mind is even clearer. Like all this stuff is interrelated. And it's because when you've been training for 3 to 6 years, you think more is better.
Yeah.
More is not better. Strategic optimization is better.
Okay.
Every 8 week block, I'm trying to optimize things so that I'm making progress and not staying plateaued or hitting a stall or getting injured.
I'm gonna shift a little bit to come back to this. When I started with Victory in 2011. So around that time, Victory was putting out a lot of fighters, from Orland Park, Forest Park. There's where I trained at the UIC location, there's some fighters coming out of there. So, and I'd go to these fights and I was always impressed with how it felt like Victory just was always winning, and I remember there was one night that there was one guy lost and it was like, whoa, what's going on? Like we didn't because we there Victory had a nice little win streak going. Um, and at that time Anthony was coaching, head coach, but he would always tell me you were his coach and then you train Mac with his coaches and for his fights. What do you attribute the success to the fighters that you trained directly and then, the fighters that were coming out of Victory even when your coaches took over?
I would say that number one, we had a very strong competition team.
Okay.
And a lot of the gyms in the area at that time didn't have competition teams because the gyms were smaller. We happen to have the luxury of having multiple gyms.
Yeah.
So if you're just a single gym operator, your pool of people to be on a competition team is very small. So they didn't even have that. They basically just had maybe one or two alpha guys in the gym,
Yeah.
and then those two guys were the competitors for that gym. so with this big team, we would have, I mean, you remember, Sean, there's times where we have competition practice
Yeah.
and there would be 30, 35 guys there.
Mhm.
And so when you have that big of a pool of people to spar with and to learn from and to kind of iron sharpens iron, train with, it's you're gonna get the cream of the rice come to the top. It's you're going to get some standouts because there's just it's such a good competition pool of guys that are all there for the same reason. And I think the other thing about having it wasn't just the fact that we had a competition team, Sean, it was that there was a system, there was a process you had to go through in order to get on the competition team. And then once you made the team, you weren't really thought of to be a fighter until you've been there for a while.
Yeah.
And then once finally kind of got to that point, someone might say, okay, in 6 months, we're going to start looking for a potential fight for you.
I still have nightmares of that comp team tryout that I went through. I was in there for a while, and I just remember I try to go back and do some of the repressed memories because that was I tell people that comp team tryout that I went through was probably the hardest physical thing that I've done. And that's I understood it, I remember you being there. I remember Anthony gave like a speech at the beginning, and just between the two of you, it was like it felt like we were doing something, and I feel like I got away from that for a while, and I started, implementing that back with the tryouts and that physical push because for me as 120 pounds at the time when I took that tryout and there were things that I don't know if you remember that big old monster truck tire that we had at
Oh
Orland
yeah.
flip, that seemed like something that was impossible for me to flip, but you and Anthony got me through it, even if it was just one little hand that kind of was giving that little push on the tire to placebo or not to help me flip that tire over. Physically, I was exhausted, but that mental, it was like, okay, I can do something. I can do these things because that gauntlet that you put us through at the end, it was when you explained what it was, my first thing was like, I'm not going to be able to do this. It took me 45 minutes to finish it, but I finished it, and
Yeah.
that was really something that it was like beyond the physical training that I've done. I going through the black belt test, going through fight camps, that particular day sticks out as the time where it's like I really started to believe that there was something inside of me that I haven't tapped into yet, that you guys were really starting to reach in there to try to pull out of me.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that. I really kind of took that idea from the military, Sean, because one thing I wanted to make sure is that the culture of the comp team was awesome. And what I mean by that is when you walked into comp team practice and you saw 25 other guys,
Yeah.
everybody there knows they earned the right to be there. They
Mhm.
had to go through Hell Week, basically, or Hell Day
Yeah.
in order to be there. So, in other words, there was a mutual respect everybody had for each other.
Yeah.
But there's also a seriousness to our comp team practices because everybody had to earn the right to be there.
Yeah. And I remember the people that I tried out with. Like there was a certain bond that was built the same way because I tested with Zach for my black belt. Like him and I are connected. Like we went through something together and we got through on the other side. So I think that's very important. The community and the culture of the gym, I think, is something that I also try to take from Victory because it was so important for me to feel like I belong somewhere. I never had too many friends growing up, but and I remember the first phone call I had with Anthony when I inquired for Victory. I told him, I don't care about your belt systems. I don't care about making friends. Like, I just want to fight. I was that guy, and I would get phone calls like that, and I was like, oh, But it all changed as soon as I met Anthony, and he was so respectful and he didn't care it was my first day. He treated me like I was there forever. And when I finally got to meet you, because obviously Anthony would tell me all the stories about you, when I finally got to meet you and see that it's not just Victory UIC that has this culture, it it was able to spread across. I think there was like 7 or 8 locations when I was there, and it was just I was like, wow, this is something special. And when I took over the gym and trying to do it with just one location, I was like, this is hard. Not only is it special to do it, but it's difficult to maintain it. And that's where I started understanding you from a different perspective. And I grew more gratitude for you for being able to do that for 8 locations, and I think that's why so as soon as you reached out and said, let's do a podcast, I was excited because I think the mindset that you have, and I think it's something that needs to be spread, and people need to hear about these things and knowing that no matter what, because I know a lot of the fighters at Victory had, like Jordan Wiggins was he's an athletic guy, but you took people that weren't the most athletic people either, and you turned them into something. So I think that's what people need to hear, that it's possible for them, no matter what kind of background that they have, that they're gonna get stronger physically, they're gonna get stronger mentally, they're gonna get stronger emotionally through training. And I think what you're doing with this optimization is gonna help people understand that a lot better. Because sometimes, and I went through it this morning. I'm trying to coach people, and I'm using, we were grappling this morning, and I was using wrestling lingo. And then a non-wrestler said, just keep your hips up and get your hips away. And that person got it right away. I was like, oh,
Yep.
so I think the way that you're explaining this optimization is a way that people can apply that not only to their martial arts, though, but to all aspects of their life in a way that connects everything together.
Yeah, that's so true, Sean, because in essence, it's like this. If you're taking up martial arts, okay, you have to understand that it's a minimum 10-year journey
Mm,
if you want to be highly proficient. Okay, you might be able to get proficient maybe in 5 to 6 years, probably, proficient, handle yourself in most situations, most untrained people. But if you're going to be highly proficient or if you're going to be competitive, it's going to take you 10 years. Now, if you're not optimal, you're either never going to reach the goal of being proficient or highly proficient, or you're going to get injured along the way and quit.
mm,
So you have to know that look at, you're paying for martial art classes. You're spending time at the gym. If you're only getting 50% out of yourself and out of your classes, you need to start to think about optimizing. Because I don't know about you, Sean, but there's not too many people that can waste a lot of time and money.
yeah.
So if you're going to be paying for classes, if you're going to be dedicating yourself to a couple of days a week at the gym, then really take the time to think about, how do I optimize my learning? How do I optimize my applying? How do I optimize my athletic attributes? And when you do that, you're going to learn to optimize all other areas of your life. How do I optimize my schedule? How do I optimize my relationships? How do I optimize my work? You're gonna, how am I gonna optimize my free time? It's like optimization is a lens in which to look at everything through. Let me give you one more example of optimization just for those, because I don't want to leave the guys that are competing out. I
Yeah.
want to try to give them something practical, and I think it'll help the school owner, the gym owners too. So when you're let's look at a unoptimal contest prep or competition prep. So you have the student that's been sparring, kind of maintaining their level, and they want to fight.
Mm,
So then they look for a fight or get contacted by a promoter, and they come to the coach and they're like, "Coach, I can take a fight in like 2 months." Well, at that point, most of the time they're either a couple pounds to maybe 10 to 12 pounds overweight for what
mm,
their weigh-in's going to be so they can be their best. Now, the problem with that is, Sean, is that they're going to have to lose 10 pounds and get better as an athlete at the very same time.
yeah.
That is super, super hard to do. I mean, that is the chances of you being able to do that effectively is very, very low. So you're going to put yourself in a fight camp, which is highly stressful. You're going to bring down calories, which is highly stressful. And then you're going to try to make a weigh in which you're going to take maybe 24 hours to try to recover from so that you can compete at your highest level. That doesn't make any sense, right?
No.
Now, what would optimal look like? Optimal is the fighter's not really even thinking about fighting until he's 5 to 7 pounds under his weight class. Now, I know that seems like, heresy. Like how can that be? But just hear me out, guys. So if you're 5 to 7 pounds underweight and you go to your coach and you say, Coach, I'm interested in a fight, and he says, Yeah, I can find something in 2 or 3 months. Now you have 8 to 12 weeks to feed up, to bring calories up, to fuel the performance in the fight camp. And then when you go to weigh in, you've for the 8 weeks leading up to the fight, your competitor has been starving himself. For the last 8 weeks, you've been feeding yourself more and more leading into the fight. So then on the day of the weigh-ins and afterward, he's trying in 24 hours to recover his hydration and his glycogen, basically in his muscles. You don't have to do that because you've been eating up into the contest. You're
Mm.
already filled. Now, out of those two guys, Sean, who's going to have the better 8 week training camp?
The one that did that.
Yes. And
Yeah.
then think about this. Which one of those two fighters, the one that came in, started the fighting camp 5 to 7 pounds
Sure.
underweight, or the other guy that came 5 to 7 pounds overweight, which one is actually going to recover after the weigh-ins properly and be ready to perform and compete at their highest level?
The one that started under. Because the person that's starting over is depleting as they need to peak, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, the takeaway, guys, is that if you're a competitor and you're thinking about fighting or competing, every time that you have a date in mind, you want to try to be 5 to 7 pounds underweight leading up to that. Meaning, I want to get all my fat burning done before I start training camp. So that when I start training camp, I can eat a little bit more and I can train a little bit harder so that it's like I'm finally going to reach a peak. I started low, but I'm going to reach a peak instead of starting high and reaching a low.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the biggest things that I've never enjoyed about competing is the weight cut process. In wrestling in high school, we did it all the wrong ways, and I feel like especially in the old school, there's a lot of wrong ways of doing it. I think MMA takes it up a notch because when it comes to any kind of grappling, because it's jiu-jitsu tournaments too, you weigh in the same day you compete. So there's only so much that you can deplete your body to make weight. But with MMA, it gives you 24 hours to refuel. So people feel like they can lose all this weight. And I see so many times, and I tell my athletes, a training camp shouldn't be the 8 week, the 10 week camp, whatever it is, to get in shape. You need to be in shape before the camp starts, and the camp is going to be there to optimize your performance of what you're going to do in that competition. Not to get in shape, not to make weight. All those things shouldn't be a worry. The biggest goal should be how are you going to win this competition. So that's why I try
Right.
to tell my athletes too. So thank you for backing that up so I don't look like the crazy guy all the time.
Yeah, and just think, I mean, you're not crazy, Sean, but think about like the level of stress, and you know this from wrestling and from your MMA competing and stuff. You're actually almost bringing yourself at weigh-ins to the point of no recovery.
Yeah.
So even if you carb up and you get a whole bunch of dehydration done, it it typically doesn't mean you're at your best
Mhm.
because the stress level was so high going into that weigh-in.
Yeah. And the other thing I tell people is it's not just making the weight, it's being able to perform at that weight, you know? So, and because right away people tell me all the time, I can make the weight. I was like, that's not my question. That's not my concern. Is how well are you going to perform by cutting a drastic amount of weight, you know? So and we've seen, we've seen from the years that we've been watching fights, coaching fighters, we've seen the people that should have done better in competition, but if they had a bad weight cut, you would never tell that they're a highly skilled fighter just because they couldn't perform on fight night.
Exactly. And then even to take that a step further, if they had been feeding up all fight camp, it's almost unquestionably that they would have performed better.
You know?
Yeah, because their body, again, it kind of goes back to that whole stress thing too, and the cortisol and the AMPK pathway and the mTOR pathway. You diet for 8 weeks, you guys, and train like a savage.
Mhm.
Your cortisol is going to be sky high. And basically, that is going to slow you down when you try to perform. You're working against yourself
Yeah.
by dieting, training hard, and then doing a weight cut at the very end, then to try 24 hours to put a bunch of fluids and carbs in your body and think you're going to be at your best. It's not going to happen.
I don't think enough people take that into consideration, the levels of stress of just getting to the competition, let alone doing the competition. Because I remember after my first fight, Anthony had to push me off the mats. Like he told me, he's like, "You're taking a week off." And I fought him so much. I was like, "I don't need a week off. I feel good. Just let me get back into it. I need to get better." And he let me watch, and then he saw that I was starting to sneak in some reps on the pads, and he grabbed me by the shoulders and guided me. He's like, "I'll see you next week."
Hmm.
And I didn't understand it until too late because I was already coaching until I understood it because I had a fighter and I didn't implement that rule for my fighters at the beginning. And now I do because I had a fighter that dominated his fight. He had a good weight cut, he had a good training camp, dominated his fight. And then he came right back into training. He tore his bicep 2 days, 3 days after his fight. I was like,
Yep.
all right, everyone's taking a week off after competition, because
Yep.
I think a lot of people focus on their body feeling good and not understanding what the central nervous system went through.
Yep.
Get ready for the fight and to go through the fight and then to be able to recover those as well. So
Yep. And that's why you see fighters getting sick before fights all the time too.
yeah, yeah, so thank you for talking on that too, because I think that's another thing that's important. We can talk all day about all this. I love talking about this, and we've had some great phone calls the past few weeks too. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Just in closing, what advice would you give to someone that wants to start optimizing, not just maybe their training, but optimize their life? What would you consider as an important step one for optimization?
Yeah, I would say the first two things I would do is create a morning ritual and an evening ritual.
Okay.
Because the way that you start your day is going to set the tone and state that you enter the rest of the day in. And also, conversely, the way that you end your evening. We talked about this, Sean, on one of our calls. It's like most people, when they end training, they're ending training at 9 o'clock, somewhere around there. They may go home and make food, or they may stop, even worse, stop at Burger King
Mhm.
or Taco Bell or their favorite taco stand and get some food like that and then eat that and then try to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of like, your evening routine is going to dictate how you recover and sleep. Your morning routine is going to dictate how you live.
Okay.
So, you know, I guess practically there's things, like what do you take in when you first wake up in the morning? Do you drink a liter of water? You know, do you take 3 deep breaths? Do you try to look at the sunlight a little bit? All those things, they seem like they wouldn't make that big difference, but when you do them every day, it's like stock and compounding interest. It just compounds.
Yeah.
Day after day, you're just getting in the right state. And why does it matter? Because if you took a little extra time to optimize your morning routine, your work, your school, all those things are going to be better with less stress, less anxiety. There's supplementation that you could take to enhance these things. There's so many different ways to optimize it, but you got to start with your morning and your evening routines. And then from there, you can carry it on to nutrition, you can carry it on to recovery, you can even, carry it on to training. But once you have these kind of pillars that you can optimize,
Mhm.
that's the journey, And let me close on this. I think when it comes to mindset, when the goal is to try to have a high level of proficiency in a skill, if the goal is to optimize the journey to get there in the least amount of time with the least amount of injuries, it's like the young man that met that master. One day this young man was walking along and he was really thinking hard for the last couple weeks, on what the key to success really is. He's read a lot of books, heard a lot of podcasts, heard some motivational speeches, but he was kind of still confused on what does it take to really capture success. So when he bumped into this this old man said, "Well, I can tell you what the master key to success is. But you're going to have to meet me here on the beach tomorrow morning at 6 a.m." So the next day comes, 6 a.m. This young man meets this master, this older man, and they walk out into the sea, Sean. And they get out to where they're about almost neck deep. So the old man goes to the younger guy. He said, "Are you ready to learn the key to success?" And the young man says, "Yep." So the old man grabs this guy by the head and dunks him underwater and holds him underwater. And of course, this young man's fighting for his life, just trying to get a breath, just fighting to get back up above water. He finally lets him go, and the young man gets his breath and says, "What'd you do that for?" He's like, "Well, son, just like you were fighting for your breath, you're fighting for your life. That's what it's going to take for you to really gain success.
Wow.
You got to want it that bad." And the problem is, Sean, is that people think that they're going to go to class and just by time and osmosis, they're eventually going to become good. No, it doesn't really work like that, you guys. There's only, you know, there's only top of the heap. There's only a small amount of people. But if you want to become your best, in non-comparison with anybody else, if you want to be your best, you got to want it more than the air that you breathe.
Amen. That's it's powerful stuff. And it's something that people should take seriously. They should take that into consideration because nothing in life is not just training, but just nothing in life is going to come by just standing and waiting for it, or because someone next to you is doing it, it's going to rub off on you. It doesn't work that way. You have to go and
And
get
don't think just because you go to class and you have a great instructor like Sean that you're automatically just going to transform into this great proficient martial artist. That's not the case. You are going to have to optimize all areas of your life and especially around training if you want to cut down the amount of time it takes to get proficient and avoid injuries. Because again, you get injured, you're either going to quit or it's going to take 18 weeks, 12 to 18 weeks to get back.
yeah. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for the words of wisdom. I've personally missed them. I missed the stories. I try to, like I said, your DNA, your fingerprints are all over this gym. And hopefully one day we can have you over here and keep spreading your knowledge, your mindset, your wisdom, your martial arts ability. Hopefully one day we can have you out here and train with us. But thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Is there anything else that you want to say to everybody where they can find you maybe or what you got coming up?
Yeah, I'm not really too much on social media, but if you want to reach out to me because you're interested in kind of optimization and you're looking for a coach to kind of optimize your diet, your training, your mindset, your recovery, just the different areas that you can optimize. reach out to me. My personal phone number 708-209-9679. Go ahead and give me a call. We'll talk about how we can get you on a coaching program and see if we can optimize all these different areas that we talked about.
Awesome.
And Sean, thank you for having me on your show today.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll catch you all back soon.